Hi, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise.
Um, I I almost I almost feel bad talking to you about all of this because I assume you're so sick of talking about your whole experience at Laurier and what happened. But I'm really glad that you wrote it all out. It was a very engaging read, and I think that it's like super important to have it all laid out um, as you
I mean, that's
did.
why I wrote the book, is so that I never have to tell the story again.
Yeah, it's
Except if you're gonna
wise.
make me do it right now, but
I will a little bit, so I apologize.
no worries.
But I'm sure you're used to it. I'm sure you're prepared for the fact that promoting the book about the story, you're probably gonna have to talk about the story just a couple more times.
Just one last round, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, before we get super into the details about what went down at Laurier, I was interested in your perspective on academia and the fact that while you were in university, you actually began to realize that it was all kind of a crock. Um, because I didn't realize that until like years after I was out of university. So I did a BA and a master's in women's studies. While I was doing those programs, the women's studies program turned into the gender, sexuality, and women's studies program. So I have a master's in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, a BA in women's studies. And I always thought that at university you learned how to think. But I sort of began to realize maybe over the past 2 or 3 years that in fact it was really kind of the opposite. At what point did you realize that this was a bit of a sham?
I think I had an inkling of it when I was in the last couple years of my undergrad, which I did at Simon Fraser, which is where you did your master's.
Yeah, also at Simon Fraser, yeah.
Yeah, so I did my Bachelor of Communication at Simon Fraser, and yeah, in the last couple of years, there were a couple incidents where I was like, so for one example, that's kind of funny is I was in a political science class. It was on international relations, but the professor often talked about Marxism, feminism, post-colonial theory. And at one point, he made a remark about how um, people who are Islamophobic are racist. And I just put my hand up and I said, Islam isn't a race, though. And it, and then later after I said that, it didn't really turn into an argument or anything. But later after I said that, a student approached me who was in the class and he said, "Hey, are you a con?" And I said, "What?" And he's like, "Are you a conservative?" And I said, "Oh, no. And he's just like, oh, "Okay, well, it was cool of you to say that in class." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like a con? But I think it really came to a head at when I was doing my MA at Wilfrid Laurier University. So I was doing a master's of cultural analysis and social theory. I graduated in 2018, so I hold that degree. And within the first few, I guess, minutes of entering that grad program, I describe it in the book how I go to the orientation session and I noticed that all of my graduate colleagues, their research focus when they're introducing themselves is something to do with identity. And I didn't really have any strong opinions on that, but I kind of thought, oh, this seems a little bit superficial. And all they cared about was identity, or at least, 90% of them. And as I kind of progressed in my studies, I was Googling, I found myself Googling kind of in search of solace. Why is my grad program all about identity and Marx and feminism and post-colonial theory? And from there on, I kind of got exposed to different perspectives. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm like impressed that you kind of started to figure this out. I mean, I think that, I mean, I don't know if it's sort of, you end up a little bit in denial when you're doing these kinds of programs. I guess, would you call it the humanities? Is that what we're talking about specifically?
Yeah, arts programs, humanities, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, part of that is because you're rewarded essentially for not thinking. So you're rewarded for regurgitating jargon, and you feel like you're doing something right. Like you're like, wow, I'm really smart. Like I have a 4.0, like my professors are like telling me how great my work is. They're encouraging me to try to get published. They're encouraging me to apply for the PhD program. You know, I'm doing a really good job. I'm really doing something right. And yeah, but it to me ends up feeling like, I mean, you really just you sort of learn what to say. You know, I started at a certain point because I was planning on doing a PhD, and at a certain point I decided I didn't want to because I was like, this is boring. Like I'm not, it's so, I can churn out these essays so easily. You just have to drop like certain language, and you know what the analysis is supposed to be, you know exactly what you're supposed to do. So it's not only not interesting, but you're creating a product that really isn't going to change anything and isn't going to go anywhere. The only people who are going to read it are maybe like a few other people in academia.
Exactly. And because I was doing my bachelor's in communication, it seemed like almost every single class was the representation of blank in the media, the representation of fat bodies in the media, the representation of this ethnicity, of queer people. And it was being recycled. Every single class, it was the representation of in the media. Oh, and of course, the discussion of how we need people behind the scenes to be representative of those communities too. And at a certain point, I was like, this discussion, we've been having it for 4 years, and where's it going?
Right. And I mean, I guess I wonder why you think, or maybe when do you think that happened? I mean, I know that you weren't in university when it started to change, but do you think there was a certain point where these programs actually were useful and there was original thought happening and then something changed? Or do you think this is sort of just the nature of liberal arts programs?
I think it has something to do with declining academic standards. I think when you're talking about things like representation of blank in the media, it's a very easy topic. It's very easy to write a paper where you find racism in things, where you find, isms in certain media products or whatever. It's very easy. And because universities, they need more students to enroll every year to remain viable, the standards keep declining. And, for example, at Wilfrid Laurier, once I was looking at what percent, what grade percent you need to get in. And I think for the communication studies program, it was something like 70 or below in English. I think it was maybe 68. I'd have to check. But to be admitted to the communication program. And I was kind of thinking, this is a program where the focus is on, reading and writing. And, if you're a C student in English, how can you succeed? They're not setting up these students for success, but they'll do anything to hold on to them to have more tuition payers. So
yeah, I know. I think probably at least part of the problem, if not a big part of the problem, is that universities are treating their students as customers, and of course the customer is always right.
Exactly.
So what was your experience? So you began working as a TA. Was this when you were a graduate student that you were working as a TA?
Yeah. So I graduated with my bachelor's. Well, I left BC in the summer of 2017 once I finished my BA, and moved to Waterloo, Ontario in the fall of 2017 to start my master's. And part of doing a master's is you're a teaching assistant, you're a TA. And so I was assigned to the class Communication Studies 101. That was going to be the class that I TA. And I mean, the first couple months went really well. And I think my students liked me and everything. And I taught 2 blocks of classes. And am I going into the whole controversy now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. And so as part of the class, every week we had a theme. So part of the class, we would focus on punctuation or citation style, or there were 2 weeks allocated for grammar. And so I was thinking, how can I make grammar interesting? Because, I'm gonna talk about grammatical errors and, common grammatical problems. But I also want to make my students see how it applies to real life. And so to show that, to demonstrate that, I brought in a clip from TVO's The Agenda with Steve Paikin, a publicly funded television show. I had watched Steve Paikin's show before in my undergrad classes and liked it. And on this episode, it was the clip I showed at least featured Jordan Peterson, as well as a professor of transgender studies named Nicholas Matt, who was also at the University of Toronto. And they were just talking about compelled speech and, pronouns, gender pronouns. I think back then the discussion was about je and jur and kind of alternative pronouns. I don't think that's so much the focus anymore. I think it's more on should trans women enter women's spaces. I think that's a lot more culturally relevant now. But at the time, it was alternative pronouns. And I played, a couple minutes to my class from this, and I said, and we talked about it. We talked about whether either person on that panel on The Agenda with Steve Paikin had any merit to their arguments. And it went really well. The conclusion of the class, a lot of my students mentioned English is a language that is in flux. We don't speak Shakespearean English anymore. And so if we add, a couple new pronouns or we start really integrating they, them, then so be it. And that was, I think, kind of the note that the class was left on. We also talked about, I asked my students if they speak any other languages, whether those languages are gendered and have gendered pronouns. So that was the nature of the class. And it all went well. But then about a week later, I hear from my supervising professor from that course. His name was Nathan Rambukkana. And he sends me an email requesting that I meet with him the next day. And he didn't say why. And he also said that my MA program coordinator would be there, as well as a diversity office bureaucrat, the gendered and sexual violence coordinator, something like that was her title. And immediately this set off red flags because I thought, I'm not the kind of person who needs to meet with a diversity coordinator. I consider myself a pretty empathetic person. And so I thought, I'm going to need to protect myself. So I'm going to attend this meeting in less than 24 hours, and I'm going to secretly record it just in case. And
did you, sorry to interrupt you, did you know what the meeting was going to be about? Did you suspect that you did something wrong, that they perceived to be wrong? Or did you kind of just have no idea what you were walking into and why? Were you just totally confused?
So it was the week after I had shown the Jordan Peterson clip. So I figured that was why. That was the only thing it could have been. Mm-hmm. But it was, it's fishy to me when they won't just say it. They won't just say, you did this. They wouldn't put anything in writing in the email. So yeah, I attend the meeting. I push record on my laptop. And in that meeting, they tell me that I had targeted trans folks. I had created a toxic environment. It was like I neutrally played a speech by Hitler. And I had violated the school's gendered and sexual violence policy. And as well, they accused me of violating the Ontario Human Rights Code and Bill C-16 itself. But then I took that recording and I went immediately to the media, and it turned into a national and international controversy in that fall of 2017.
Mm-hmm. And so did you have an opinion on Jordan Peterson and, what he was talking about in terms of these preferred pronouns and that whole debate prior to playing the clip?
I thought what he was saying was compelling, and I hadn't ever heard anything like it before. But I wouldn't say I was on his side. I was very skeptical of him, actually. And during the secret recording I made, I put a whole transcript in my book. I say, you know, I'm not a fan of Jordan Peterson, but I slowly did become a fan. And I think I was just very scared that it seemed like he was enemy number one in the university. And at that time, I just wasn't confident enough to say, no, I don't think he's this evil person. I was too influenced by my own professors, but I broke free of that eventually.
Mm-hmm. And you probably just didn't know all that much about him at the time. I hadn't heard of Jordan Peterson before he started talking about this and testified against Bill 16, because I also testified against Bill C-16. So I think probably early on, I remember defending him early on. I remember listening to an interview with him on the CBC, and I think it was Carol Off who was interviewing him, or Anna Maria Tremonti. I think it was Carol Off. Do you know which interview I'm talking about? She was so rude to him. Anyway, she was incredibly rude. She was, obviously didn't want to do the interview, like wasn't interested in really engaging with what he was saying, yada, yada, yada. But in any case, I remember defending him. But I also sort of went back and forth on him, because if you haven't actually looked into his work yourself, then all you do is read about him, either in your social media feed or even, in the mainstream media. There'll be articles published in like very legitimate publications, the New York Times, that interpret what he's saying in a completely oversimplistic and unfair way. So you don't even really realize that you're developing a bias. You're just like, wow, he said that? That's terrible. He thinks that? I don't think that. So yeah, it's probably likely that you just didn't really know that much about him yet. But I guess, I wonder if you can talk about what he actually was saying in that clip and why that constituted, according to these TAs and professors, why that constituted a violation of what's the policy called again? Sorry.
It was the sexual violence policy.
The sexual violence policy, and and Bill C-16 and the Ontario Human Rights Code.
So in the university's sexual violence policy, at the time, I think they've since changed it, but you weren't allowed to question people's pronouns or make their pronouns or their identity. You're not allowed to make them feel invalid. And so the clip I showed was of Peterson saying, he didn't want to be compelled to use these pronouns. And that was really the gist of it. And then Nicholas Matt was saying, the professor of transgender studies, that you need to use these pronouns because they're connected to people's dignity. And so I just went to my class, and I had no position on the matter. I was interested in what my students had to say. And so I was very neutral. And I said, what do you guys think of this? What do you make of it? But in the meeting, I found out that my neutrality was the problem. Rambukkana, my professor, the supervising professor, he said that outright, that it was the problem, my neutrality. And if I had condemned Jordan Peterson in front of my class and said, here's an example of transphobia, I probably would have won a teaching award, and I would have been lauded for being an amazing TA. So,
yeah, that's interesting. So they were saying, because I think, as I recall, like they were sort of trying to accuse you of having a bias in favor of Peterson and his arguments. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the first questions I was asked when I entered the meeting was, so you were a student of Jordan Peterson, right? And I said, no, I didn't go to the U of T. I went to SFU. And then Rambukkana quickly goes, oh, so you didn't go to U of T? No. So, they did see me as, an acolyte or something, which is something I was called.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it's like they're sort of accusing you of having a bias, and that's a bad thing. But then they're suggesting you actually should have a bias. Like they didn't want you to be neutral; they wanted you to be biased, just in the way that they preferred.
Right. And, when I went back after all this happened, I looked at the course syllabus because Rambukkana, he said that we teach this course from a social justice perspective. And when I heard that, I just kind of thought, oh, okay, whatever. I didn't realize how much of an ideological agenda was attached to that term at the time. And so, yeah, I went back and looked at the syllabus, and yeah, he said, we teach, and some of the readings even said outright that we teach from a social justice approach, which is something, yeah, before I just glossed over it, didn't think much of it, thought of it as a bit of an empty term. But that's why, in a way, I'm thankful for what I went through at Laurier, is because I learned what is behind these kinds of terms. And I was really thrust into these issues of campus free expression, open inquiry, political correctness. And now I really understand them, and I'm thankful that I do. Because otherwise, I might have gone on thinking, like a lot of people do, that there's just no problem on campuses at all.
Well, yeah, and the term social justice sounds like a good thing. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. So what in fact does that mean? What did you learn that means, social justice?
So the way I see social justice and, diversity ideology is they want to enforce ideological conformity. They want you to think that, Canada is a systemically racist country and trans women are women, and you must be pro-choice in all circumstances. And you can disagree or agree with some of those points, but their job, the job of a diversity office on campus is to enforce that ideological conformity and make sure that everyone has those views.
Right. So I think you were told that a student or some students made a complaint about you, and this is why you're being pulled into this meeting. Did you ever see a complaint from a student?
No, and I ask at multiple points in the meeting, can I see the complaint? Because I was so skeptical. I wanted to see it. I wanted to read it. I wanted to know how many people complained, and they just weren't giving me anything. And yeah, eventually it comes out that there was no complaint. And it's still really a mystery how this came to be a disciplinary meeting. I don't have any information, but something that struck me was, if I didn't secretly record this meeting and force these answers, the answers that I do have, out of Laurier, then I would have gone for the rest of my life thinking that I had really upset people to the point where they wanted to make a complaint. And they felt like they couldn't even approach me in class. They needed to make a complaint about me. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people probably go through their lives with that, baggage.
Did you know, so after you recorded this meeting, you went to the media. Did you know this was going to be a really big story?
No. So I looked up, who can I go to? And I ended up emailing almost every mainstream outlet. And the first to reply was Christy Blatchford from the National Post, the now late Christy Blatchford. And once she wrote her article, it came out on November 10th, 2017. I was like, okay, awesome. Like, my story is out now. I read every single comment on the article. I didn't want to miss anything. And I thought, okay, like, now it feels settled. And I'm glad I got the story out. And all is good. I went to the convenience store to get a paper copy of the newspaper that day, just to have a memory of it. And I figured that's that. But then, of course, I had, more interview requests come in. And once, a portion of the actual audio recording was leaked by Global TV, that's when, it really got crazy.
Mm-hmm. I remember at the time seeing a lot of leftists, some of whom I knew online, and a lot of leftists actually specifically in academia, kind of trying to, suggesting that this was a setup on your part. Your like fake tears, like you had sort of planned this all out. This was all some kind of plot, positioning you as some kind of conniving, lying villain, which I found really callous and cynical, obviously, and gross, especially because, yeah, like a lot of these people were teaching in universities, sessionals or whatever, TAs also, of course, which made it worse to me because they're in these positions where they really shouldn't be vilifying students and other TAs. If you're in a position of power in a university and I just thought it was so inappropriate to be talking about you and speculating about you in this way. And it also just, I listened to the recording at the time and it did not read like you were faking, like I was really shocked and appalled to be listening to this and to hear the way that you were being treated.
Yeah, I mean, I really did stumble into it, and I stumbled into it when it was such a hot topic in the news at the time as well. What was I going to say? What were we talking about?
Just, I mean, that these TAs and sessionals were kind of trying to frame you as having intentionally set this up.
Yeah, no, I had never intended for the secret recording to be heard by anybody except for the journalists I sent it to. And so I asked Christy Blatchford, can you, I'll send you the recording, but please don't mention that I made this recording. And, please don't publicize it. Because at the time, I didn't know if it was legal to have made that recording. It turns out it is because, in the jurisdiction I was in, Ontario, Canada, only one person needs to know that there's a recording happening in the room, and that person was me in this particular case. So I had never intended anyone to hear it. Otherwise, I probably would have tried to make better arguments in the tape, and I probably would have tried harder not to cry, even though it was really hard, because I felt bewildered and confused and kind of intimidated. But yeah, so Global TV, after I did a TV interview with them, they asked for the recording and I sent it to them. And I'm not really sure how it happened because I don't remember giving explicit permission for them to publish the recording. But I don't remember saying no. But either way, it got out, and it's better that it did in the end. So, and then National Post published the whole 42-minute recording.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and what did I read in your book that you were, I think one woman, Amy Morrison, is that her name, wrote about you and accused you of having white lady tears. Like, what does that mean? What did you think about that kind of accusation?
Yeah, so I've quite a few people made that accusation. So it's just the idea that because I'm a white woman, I could use my tears to leverage over a person of color, because Nathan Rambukkana, my supervising professor, was not white. So I was using my tears to, what they wanted to invoke was, the Jim Crow South, where, you hear of these cases where there were, false rape allegations against Black men from white women. That's what they were trying to compare it to. And the Emmett Till thing, I think, is one of them. So that's the line of reasoning they were going on. But someone wrote a letter of support that was circulating that I read, and they were saying, the Jim Crow South has no bearing on 2017 modern day Canadian academia. Like, you just can't make that comparison. And there was a Quillette writer, Yuri Harris, who wrote, power dynamics are a part of this story at the Laurier, the Laurier controversy story. But, race and gender is not part of that power dynamic. It's just who has what position. I was a lowly TA and they were these high-level professors and a bureaucrat. So
yeah, and I would read that as sexist also. Like, I don't really like this accusation where people claim that women are using their tears to manipulate a situation. I mean, you were in a vulnerable and stressful situation. Um, and it's, yeah, I actually find that kind of a sexist thing to say, which I guess it doesn't matter anymore because if you're white, sexism doesn't apply.
well, and not to mention, I mean, my MA coordinator, who was also in the meeting, he was a white male. So what am I leveraging over him? You know, it's just they completely ignored him in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Someone wrote, one of your professors, or a professor, sorry, wrote to you in support, Paul Adams, and he said something to the effect of, he said, they sound like people who are used to standing up in front of a class and talking for a long time without being challenged or interrupted, an experience which is not good for the soul. And I mean, I thought something similar when I was reading through your story, which is that I was like, these people just are not used to being challenged on anything, which is the opposite of the point of academia.
Yeah, no, when I read that article by Paul Adams, I was so grateful that someone said that. Yeah, they're not used to being challenged. I don't know, what can you say? It isn't good for the soul.
I've started to feel that academia is a little bit of a lost cause at this point, although that's probably a very cynical perspective. But we do at least need another model. And I don't know if that can happen so long as universities, again, continue to treat students like customers. But what do you think? I mean, is there a future for academia? Or, you know, I mean, I don't know how we can burn it all down and start it all over again. And it seems pretty far gone. You know, it ends up feeling sort of like a circle jerk where they're all reinforcing each other's non-thinking over and over and over again and rewarding one another and just churning out the same things. And nobody wants to question anything, probably because they're afraid of losing their jobs.
I think, yeah, there are kind of two schools of thought. So some are, you know, let's just create our own model of education. A lot of people bring up doing an online university, like kind of university model.
Mm-hmm.
But others are reformists and think we need to take back the academy. And I'm more of a reformist. So I think we need to play the long game, and we need people who do believe in free expression, and who don't abide by this politically correct orthodoxy to get in there. And there are a few ways you could do it. You could, hide your true beliefs and your true leanings. And once you're in a position of power, you could, or once you feel, you could, start to let your beliefs be known. Or you could, try to get in, with the views you do have. But I think we need to, take it back. I really do. If I was someone where you Googled my name and nothing came up, that's what I would try to do, is try to get a position at a university. Obviously, when you Google my name, if a university HR department were to Google me, I would not get hired. I've already had that experience where I was hired at a small college in 2020, and then my contract was canceled after I showed my face at the faculty orientation. But yeah, if you're someone who, when you Google your name, nothing really comes up that could scare off a university hiring committee, I think you should try to get in there. That's my view.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I found pretty shocking about the whole conversation and reaction to your showing Peterson's interview was that these people really genuinely believed that it was a breach of the human rights code to criticize pronouns or just to really question anything surrounding gender identity. It seemed like they saw criticizing Bill C-16 itself as a violation of the Human Rights Code.
Yeah, and to an extent, I think, in particular, the communication study faculty at Wilfrid Laurier University were really invested in this issue, because I came to realize that a lot of them are LGBTQ. And Herbert Pimlott, who was one of the interrogators, he was my MA program coordinator, why was he in the meeting? He has nothing to do with my ITA-ship. I don't know why he was there, but it does turn out that he's a member of the cross-dressing community. So, why was he there? Is it because he had a personal stake and he wanted to have a say? It was, kind of fishy. And so, yeah, a lot of that department just seemed to be really invested in issues like, promoting transgender ideology, promoting pronoun use, mandated pronoun use, all that. So I think it was also partly, within this particular department, why they were so ideological about it.
And at the time, you, I think, identified as a leftist. Why was that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so when I started to see accusations that I'm, this right-winger, this conservative, I put out a statement very quickly on my newly created Twitter account at the time, and I said, I am a leftist. And that is how I saw myself. I'm pro-choice. I'm a vegetarian. I'm like an advocate of public transit and stuff like this. So I just saw the right as, religious, pro-life, big business. And so I thought, that's definitely not me. So I must be just a leftist. And so I started to make that very clear, and that piqued people's interest, because it's not so often that you come across, an advocate for free expression who also says they're a leftist. And so I think that was very interesting to people. But, as the months went by, I kind of thought, okay, I don't want to label myself as a leftist anymore. I'm not going to use any labels. If I do have to call myself something, I would say centrist.
Mm-hmm. I think, we met because back in 2018, you invited me to do a talk at Laurier. And you were actually, I don't know if it was publicized in this way, but I think you were actually the first person in Canada to organize an event about gender identity and women's rights. Because I can't totally remember all the emails, but you contacted me asking me if I wanted to come talk about this, and I said yes. And we almost had to cancel that event.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had two people recommend you. One was a colleague who was in my English class, and she was, she's a very extreme feminist, I would say. And she said, invite Megan Murphy to your club. Because I was running the Laurier Society for Open Inquiry. We were, just inviting speakers who, definitely wouldn't be invited by the university bureaucracy. We're just interested in different perspectives. And she said, yeah, invite Megan Murphy. She's like controversial in these feminist circles. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I had a professor recommend you as well. And yeah, so sent you an invite. And I describe in the book how I almost canceled on you, because I was like, no venue is going to host us. They're all, not responding. But eventually you said, don't give up. And it was because you said that like immediately after I thought, okay, I will find somewhere. And so I contacted a local auditorium in the city of Kitchener, and surprisingly, they were extremely helpful. They charged us way less in security than Laurier was saying, because, yeah, that's the reason we couldn't do it at Laurier's, because it was going to be, $8,055, I think it was, to host you. And I just, yeah. So, and then, when we did it at the municipal venue, they charged, 1,000 something. So the event went off in the end.
Right. And that wasn't the first time that you learned that tactic of charging really extreme security fees was actually, it was, you know, a tactic essentially to shut down events, right?
Yeah, so a few months before that, because your event was in October 2018, in May 2018, I had Francis Widowson come in, and she's a professor at Mount Royal University who is critical of the indigenization of universities, you know, like these mandated Indigenous land acknowledgements, the idea that we have to, you know, respect Indigenous ways of knowing that Dr. Widowson sees as anti-science. So we invited her. The university, Laurier, charged us $5,700-ish, which we did fundraise, actually. So we were able.
Was that all for security fees?
Apparently, yeah. And there was a protest, but I don't know if it was worth almost $6,000. But yeah, so when I, you know, submitted the room booking request for your event, it was actually a professor named Will McNally who submitted the room request because he was a faculty member and a supporter. They upped the ante and they said, you know, oh, 5,700 didn't scare you off last time, so this time we'll try 8,000.
Ridiculous. I mean, they kind of tried that at our events in Vancouver at the VPL, at the Vancouver Public Library, and at SFU. And actually, our event at SFU was canceled because some activist essentially was so threatening that they managed to completely freak out the security team, and they canceled the event at the last minute. And I find it very, I mean, funny in a dark way that it's like these activists threaten extreme violence or there's bomb threats or something like that, and then it becomes the onus is on us to pay these exorbitant amounts for security to protect us from these activists that suffer no consequences for these threats of violence.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that, you know, the event organizers should be responsible for paying for other people to protest the event, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. So I thought it was interesting. You talked about at your graduation ceremony, Ivan Coyote, who's a local queer writer. Is that how they define themselves, as queer? I think so. Anyway, and they said something to the effect of, you know, anyone who has to seek out a gender neutral washroom on campus had to work harder than someone who didn't. And you thought that was sort of a strange thing to say.
Yes. So I completed my BA at Simon Fraser in August 2017, but the convocation wasn't till October 2017. So I was already enrolled in grad school, but I flew back to convocate. And for my ceremony, this was the honorary degree recipient who was giving a speech, Ivan Coyote. And so Ivan gives this speech and says that, yeah, if, you know, Ivan was talking about how some groups, you know, deserve special recognition. And this was one of them, is if you had to find a gender neutral washroom on campus. And everyone around me clapped at the end of the speech, but I was just sitting there like, I'm not going to clap for this. This is an awful message. So I just sat there like, what?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, it's that part especially I thought was really strange. It's like, I don't really know what that has to do with working hard in academia, but.
And besides, they're making almost every washroom on campus a gender neutral one now.
Yeah.
Like when I was at SFU for one of the last times I was there, on the Vancouver campus, they made one of the women's washrooms a multi-stall gender neutral washroom. And, you know, I mean, you know, it's not the, you know, when you have something in downtown Vancouver and you have an open washroom, you're going to attract, you know, people from the street, which is, I mean, whatever, they have to go somewhere. But I open the door to the washroom and I see like a homeless man brushing his teeth at the sink or whatever. And I walk right out. Like, I'm not going in there, you know, like I'm fine with single stall gender neutral washrooms, but like Multistall, where like anyone can do anything in there. And there was a recent case where a man was, trying to take pictures of a woman. I can't remember where. It was at a university in Canada, I think. But yeah, I'm not going in there.
No, I would feel super uncomfortable. So after all this happened to you at Laurier, how were things for you there? I know that there was, people were accusing you of harassment and of doxing and of, making them unsafe and so on and so forth. But what was your experience at Laurier after all this happened? Did you feel really safe and not threatened?
It was interesting because I had so much support online, and yet when I went on campus, I did have the occasional supporter who would come and introduce themselves, but yeah, it was pretty hostile. But I kind of felt protected by, the support I was getting online. But, one of the reasons I called the book Diversity and Exclusion is because there was in one case, a grad class I was in. We were about halfway through the semester, and the last few classes were going to be student presentations. So we would just watch one another's presentations and then end the semester. And then suddenly the professor changed the course structure. So she said, this was after I had been hosting events, like Laurier Society for Open Inquiry events that were, causing controversy on campus. And the professor said, from now on, we're going to change it so that you just invite who you want to your class presentation. And that'll be how it proceeds for the rest of the semester. And of course, none of my student colleagues invited me to their presentation. And so class for me was over for the semester. It went on for everyone else, at the time when the professor said, okay, class, we're going to now shift to this new model of the class. If you were invited to this presentation, you may stay. If you weren't, you can go work on your final papers. And I was the only one who stood up to leave the class because everyone else had invited everyone else. It was just me who wasn't. So it was a way to get me out of the class, just because they didn't like my views, my philosophy, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of, the theme for the rest of the school year.
And what happened to your academic career?
So I think they have to be very careful with grades. There are a lot of mechanisms to appeal grades. And, I think academically they had to be fair to me. So I graduated with an A- average. That's fine. But, just because of the way things went down and I was maligned within the university, they never cleared my name, really. They said there was no complaint, but yet there are, lawsuits ongoing now, and they're proceeding with lawsuits.
Can you explain the lawsuit a bit?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Yeah.
So I took up an offer to be represented pro bono by Howard Levitt, who's a Toronto employment lawyer. And so we are suing Laurier for, in legalese, it's, I think, like negligence and just, they made me unemployable, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And Jordan Peterson simultaneously filed a defamation lawsuit. So mine is not a defamation lawsuit, but his is. And that's because the professors in the meeting called him a charlatan. They compared him to Hitler, that kind of stuff. And then the university launched a third-party claim against me. So they're saying if Jordan Peterson was indeed defamed, it would be my fault because I made the recording of the defamation. So there's kind of just, lots of lawsuits going on right now. But because Jordan Peterson is part of the legal action and he's not feeling well, the lawsuits actually haven't progressed at all since 2018. So a lot of people are really interested in that. But yeah, it hasn't progressed at all. And I was skeptical about lawsuits. Some people are really into them and they think they're the best method to fight back. I was a little skeptical, but I guess what made me feel better was saying, if I do win, or, they offer a settlement. I don't really know how it works, but then I will, donate some of the proceeds to some of the, winnings or whatever to organizations that are fighting for free expression, like the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, Heterodox Academy. They've gotten a little bit, but yeah, and also I think it will just be interesting to see what the courts have to say. So that's why I decided to go forward with it.
Mm-hmm. And what's going on for you now? What's next?
So the book was really important to me, and I'm glad that that's out because I wanted to document everything. Hopefully it'll be in libraries and students will come across it and that kind of thing. What's next though? Other things. I have a son. That's how I spend a lot of my time. I have 2 fellowships. So I'm the Campus Free Speech Fellow at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.
Okay.
But right now they're very focused on anti-lockdown efforts because, classes aren't even in session. So there's not much for me to do as a Campus Free Speech Fellow when, nothing is being canceled, nothing is being shut down because, nothing is just happening at all. And I'm also a fellow with True North, tnc.news. So I write and do the occasional video for them too.
Mm-hmm. And where will people be able to find your book? Do you know?
It's only Amazon. So just amazon.com, amazon.ca, whatever your applicable market is. I made a YouTube video explaining on my own channel how there is no mainstream publisher behind this book. It's technically self-published. I did like the layout and typesetting of the book and that kind of stuff, which takes a really long time.
Yeah.
And I was kind of the main proofreader. And I think I did a pretty good job. I haven't seen anyone point out any errors yet. But my colleagues at True North helped with editing too. So technically, yeah, the book is self-published, but also a book from True North, only available on Amazon.
Well, congratulations. I know how horrible it is to write a book, so good for you, and I bet you're really relieved that it's all done and over with.
Yeah, no, it feels good.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think you're in a position to self-publish if you would ever do that.
Yeah, I've had a completed manuscript for a few years now that I've wanted to rewrite because I've changed my mind about so many things and so many things have happened since then. So, but there's so much rewriting that I want to do that I really just need to carve out a chunk of time to do that. And it's hard because I am constantly so busy with everything else, but I am working on it. So someday that manuscript will be edited in a way that I feel comfortable and it'll be published somewhere. But anyway, thanks again for talking to me. It was great to connect with you again. And yeah, congratulations again on the book.
Thanks. Hope we can talk again soon.
Definitely. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.